Going into social ecology, I was already on my way to learning more about other cultures and different ways to show my appreciation for those cultures without potentially appropriating from that culture. But I was still very ignorant about a lot of things, and I feel like a lot of my Hmong friends have helped me along the way because whenever I have questions about things that people who are white shouldn't do, they answer it to the best of their knowledge. But then I hear a lot of different things come from different groups of people. So I've just been going based off of what the specific group of people say about their culture. This helped me a lot, like with art, because I just like to show my appreciation for specific things through art, and I didn't really have much clue about the connection people had to the land. I thought people were relatively similar to my family in the fact of they just grew plants that they wanted, like for vegetables or flowers they thought looked nice, or to just make their yard look a lot better. I always knew indigenous people had a very strong relationship with the land because of all of their creation stories of how the land was created for them and how spiritual it can be for them to just go outside and be within the wilderness and see all the animals and plants, and I find that to be very beautiful. For black people, it was a means of survival because when slavery had ended and they were off to fend for themselves all of a sudden out of nowhere and they didn't have anything, they were able to rely on their knowledge of working the land and how to work the land, and then they could rent plots of land from landowners and then make their money that way, although that takes a lot longer than if you own your own land. For Hmong people, they had to grow their own food to be able to acquire it, and you can't just go to a grocery store and get their like their fruits and vegetables that is for part of their culture. So they had to learn to grow it, and their food is like the most important part of their culture because it shows where you stand within the group of what food you eat. At first, I'm not going to lie, I thought it was a bit odd that people who weren't indigenous would have a connection to the land because, like, well, I know I come from an entirely white family aside from my cousin's wife and their child. So, like, I never really understood that much, but I am glad I had friends that explained other things to me. Back to connection to the land, I thought everyone else would have the same connection as me if they were indigenous. And my family isn't, like, necessarily spiritual, even though I knew there were spiritual people who would just go out and enjoy, like, nature. My family likes to go outside too, but we're not, like, immersed in it. We just walk, look at things, and then leave. Where this class taught me to, like, look around and think about the things the land could have been used for or could be used for those groups of people. I feel as though my the beginning to my aha moment was when we read the one article about the young man who he was hunting, and then the white people came over and a lot of stuff went down between them. But like we discussed the importance of hunting for like these groups, and I was like, that's really interesting because within the communities that I've grown up with, hunting was always seen as just a fun recreational activity opposed to like something that is needed. Like my family, like we would go hunting when I was a kid with them, and we would get the deer, and then we'd cut it up, share it with amongst other family members if they wanted any, because you know a deer is a lot for 4 people, I guess. But the very importance of hunting and gathering your own food to these communities, it's beautiful. Like they put so much like thought and spiritualism into their food, and I feel like a lot of people could really gain something from learning about that. That being said, the things that really did it for me were speaking with my Hmong friends about like hunting and telling them that story, and a lot of them shared that they have family farms actually where they grow their own like livestock, and they were saying how they like go take a monthly trip out there with their family to go and get like a cow or a pig, and then they share that with the rest of the community with like for what they don't need. And that really like solidified that sense of community they have within themselves in my brain. The other thing that really just like solidified it was the article about the Hmong farmers and how they were always given the worst land, and they worked so hard and they worked so sustainably, and that really like put into my head that like most people of color actually like farm and hunt sustainably, but then you have like our economy where we're overproducing so much and like so little. And then it reminded me of an article I read where we are overusing the land so much that it actually made the soil iron deficient, and that's why so many people are iron deficient now, because we are over harvesting plants. So that makes a lot more sense as to why people of color would grow their own, because it's just healthier for you, and you can just go to a farmer's market and get some if you need some. I feel as though it was very ignorant of me to not notice how important food is to Hmong people, considering half of my coworkers are Hmong, and I've been to a lot of Hmong festivals, and I've gone out to eat with my Hmong friends at Hmong restaurants. And like when I was at Hmong festivals, I would always notice how a lot of the booths would have the same like types of food, but I just thought those were like the more common ones and not like they were that important to them. And it's kind of embarrassing that I didn't notice that. And then one of my friends, we go out to eat, like, we would go out to eat at Bangkok, like, every other weekend before COVID. And, we would always order, and, like, she would always order extra to take home to her family. And I always thought that was just nice of her, but it was just, like, her showing how much she cared about her family through food because of how important that is to them. Then, when I would go with my Hmong friends to Hmong stores, I noticed how I would only be in like the snack aisle or the ramen aisle, and I didn't really pay too much attention to like the canned goods or like the fresh goods because like I didn't know what those things were, and I never even thought to like ask my friends unless like they were buying something. I'd be like, "Oh, what's that?" And they would explain to me. Um, but it really shows like how like people will go into those stores just for like the quote unquote popular things in them, and it could make them feel like they are an oddity. And some of my friends even commented on how they find it weird sometimes when white people go into the Hmong places because they'll just be in those areas, and it made me notice that I was mostly in those areas. That made me realize just how alienated from their own ethnic community and from the community of like the people around them they grew up with, where because they are Hmong and they're not living amongst other Hmong people, they could feel like they're excluded from that group, and then they're not white, so then they're excluded from that group. So then the only time that they really like feel like they can belong are in these Hmong areas. And I've never really felt like I don't belong anywhere unless like I were to go into a Hmong area without them, because like I feel like that place was not made for me, even though they are very accepting whenever I go there when I buy stuff. But like they go to the grocery store, and even though like Festival has expanded their Asian aisle, they are still lacking in a lot of things that Hmong stores have. And then in Fond du Lac, the lack of Hmong stores, they have to drive like to Oshkosh, Appleton, or Milwaukee just to get things for their food. I personally love going with my Hmong friends to restaurants and their festivals because their food is so inclusive for all dietary restrictions. Because I don't eat meat, and they have plenty of options that don't have meat that I can have. And it makes me much more appreciate that they have restaurants and they are willing to share like the biggest part of their culture with like people who want to experience it. And I can't wait for there to be another Hmong festival that I can go to so I can go there with the new understanding of what their food means to them. Growing up, I knew it was always important to learn about different cultures, religions, historical backgrounds, etc. But I didn't know just how important it was to learn about different ethnic groups. Like going back to the Bankston piece, um, like people learn from other cultures, and then that helps them better understand those cultures. Like for an example is like we learn about other religious groups, and that's so you understand why they do have the religious practices they do. Similar to Hmong people, where we learn about their connection to the land and why they are so like food oriented as a culture. Although I find it interesting that I had never heard of Hmong people until I started working at my job. It's amazing that Wisconsin is the top 3 for Hmong population, and yet I feel like so many people don't know of their existence. Even though in sustaining forests talking with Hmong Americans about their culture and use of public lands, they noticed a research issue where Hmong people are one of the least studied and least understood Asian ethnic groups in the States. And I did find that really interesting because I had no idea they exist until I started working at my job. Speaking of Hmong people being very studied, I wanted to learn more about the Secret War, which I had learned about at my friend's grandpa's funeral because he was in it and that's how their family got to come over here. So I went to the Minnesota Historical Society to learn more about it and like their traditions, and it was just really interesting how they were allowed to come over here for fighting on our side in the war, but then there are also a lot of Latino men who fought in a war for us that were sent back to Mexico. And it's amazing how many people don't even know about the Secret War still. The Fondy Farm Project article was speaking about how Hmong people were given poor land to work with, but they would make the best out of it. I decided to look even more into that, and I found the Hmong American Farmers Association, which is based in Minnesota, and a quote from them is, "Today, Hmong American farmers are leading the Twin Cities local food economy, making up more than 50% of all the farmers in metropolitan farmers markets." And I think that's amazing that they were able to like get that much like in that short of time, because like they were given like the poor hand and then they worked hard and actually and like achieve something for themselves, and they have a specific approach and they like strong communication values, and it shows how close knit they are as like a family and community even. I hope with all this new information that I have gathered and learned through this past semester that I can better explain why Hmong people like have rights to things, like right to being on public land and expressing their culture to people who don't really think that they should be allowed to. And I hope that with all of this information, I can share some of the articles that I found through this class to my Facebook or Instagram, and I'm gonna continue to share like anti-Asian hate stuff on social media because I feel like that is growing far too rapidly. The only injustices that I have personally seen in real life have been like little comments that I hear people make about just Asian people as a whole, because usually they don't understand that there are different like types of Asians, and like they just do it to hate, and I tried my best to explain to them that that's wrong and you shouldn't judge people based off of what ethnic background they come from. But I have never seen anything happen on either the UW Oshkosh campus or the UW Fond du Lac campus, and honestly I'm really glad that I've never seen it, because that would be horrible and I wouldn't feel comfortable coming to class if that. I've been working myself up into being more like action radical opposed to just thinking radically about people's rights. But at the same time, I don't want to be the voice speaking above the people of color that are being hurt. So I just frequently share things that they post because I don't want people to think that I'm making it about me because it's about them. But when I see stuff, I will correct it right then and there. In conclusion, I think schools should actually teach about the secret war and explain why there are so many Hmong people, especially in Wisconsin and the other states that have large Hmong populations, but of course all of them. Um, but they should also include why like Hmong people have their connection to the land, about their food and how important it is, like how indigenous people have to fight to get indigenous mascots removed, but people are like, oh, but it's been like this forever, but they don't understand the cultural significance of like a bald eagle flag. And I just hope that one day people will come to learn that other ethnicities exist and stop being so ethnocentric, because it'll just explain a lot about why people do certain things, vote a certain way, eat certain foods, and I feel like it would really bring everyone together so much more if they taught this stuff better in schools.